Welcome back. The election of Canada's first Muslim mayor, the first for any North American city, has people wondering, is it because of multiculturalism or in spite of it? Well, I'm discussing that with my guest, Naheed Nenshi, Calgary's new mayor, who's at the centre of the debate, and author, broadcaster and activist Tarek Fatah, who's in the Canadian city of Toronto. And Mr. Fatah, I realise that you both gentlemen have opposing views or different views on perhaps how Canada moves forward. Mr. Fatah, I could put an email to you from Ayman Simu, who wrote in from Canada saying, a person should not be judged on their religion. Canada has figured out what the rest of the world fails to realise, putting it at the forefront of equality and pluralism. So what do you think Muslims in Canada are doing right that perhaps Muslims in the US aren't doing in the right way?
Well, there is no such thing as the Muslim. There are Muslims who are liberal, secular, and there are Muslims who are orthodox and conservative. There are Muslims who are fundamentalists, who follow the Muslim Brotherhood, and who demand that Sharia law be brought into this country. What has happened, and which is distinct from the United States or Great Britain, is that in Canada there are liberal secular Muslims who've taken the courage to stand up to the jihadis. And the notion of closing your eyes to any threat by saying it does not exist won't go away, because right now we have had people in prison, we are having terror trials. We've had a recent incident in Montreal where a practicing physician who and his colleagues are involved in a terror trial. We've had incidents in the United States, in New York, everywhere, where active Muslims who demand Sharia law have been involved in this incident. And all we, as liberal secular Muslims, demand is that people renounce or denounce the doctrine of armed jihad. If they do not, then they are a very serious problem.
Let me get to the issue of tolerance. And Mr. Mayor, if I can put this to you, I know it's a word that's generally used to denote the wholehearted acceptance of immigrants in the Western nations. But listen to this well-known European philosopher, Dr. Slavoj Žižek, who had to say this about tolerance when he spoke with me recently on my show.
Tolerance is a very suspicious notion. It means, yes, let's tolerate each other. But it also means, don't harass me, which means remain at a proper distance from me. If you scratch the surface, you will also discover that the other, that liberal multiculturalists are ready to tolerate, is what I ironically refer to as decaffeinated other. You know how we have today products deprived of their poisonous substance, decaf coffee, beer without alcohol, fat-free chocolate, and so on. And it seems to me that people also want decaffeinated other.
Mr. Mayor, that's an interesting notion that, tolerance, instead of embracing, is discussing the attitude of stay away, kind of distancing from the others. What's your view on that?
Well, Mr. Zizek's basic argument rests on a foundation that I'm not sure I accept, and that foundation is that the other is always poisonous. This is kind of a semantic conversation. Here in Canada, we don't often use that word tolerance because it denotes a lower level of multiculturalism. Even though I don't much like you, I tolerate you. And we talk a lot about issues like acceptance and mutual respect. That said, maybe tolerance is actually where we want to go. I may not like you much, but I'll let you live next door to me and live your life in peace. And that may be a first step towards where we're moving. But like I say, I think that the problem is that when we start the debate with a semantic discussion assuming that the other is bad, that the other is evil, that's when we miss the point. Because it's not decaffeinated otherism in the pluralism that works in Canada and the multiculturalism that works in Canada. It's acceptance of the other. And of course, sometimes, of course you have radicalism throughout the world where the other is not accepted reciprocally. But when we live in a world where we accept the other and we don't think of the other as poisonous, that's what really works. And we've been very lucky in Canada because we are not consumed by history. We've always been a country of 2 languages and 3 founding nations, and that allows us to be able to accept people in different ways. In the early part of the 20th century, multiculturalism in Canada talked about the different European communities, many of whom had the same color skin but had different languages, different religions, and different backgrounds. And that's now evolved to being an embracing of people around the world. Okay. And that embracing, I think, goes beyond what Mr. Zizek is talking about when he says tolerance.
A question to both of you, and Mr. Mayor, I'll put it to you first, but it's for both of you, really, and it's putting you both on the spot to some degree. I mean, do you see yourself first as Canadian or as Muslim? Mr. Mayor.
I don't see the distinction. I am who I am, like Popeye, right? I am who I am. And as I said before, although the issue of my skin color and my faith never came up in the election, I certainly never walk away from it. You know, my faith, my background, the working class neighborhood I grew up in, my education, my ideas, they're all part of the crazy mix that makes up Naheed Nenshi. And you know what? They're part of the crazy mix that makes up Calgary and part of the crazy mix that makes up Canada. So sitting here as a Canadian in this city, as the mayor of over 1 million people, I can say with confidence that people are comfortable with that crazy mix, and they don't ask folks to try and make those artificial hierarchies.
Well, let me ask you then, Tarek Fatah, the same question. I know perhaps it is artificial, but let's get a perspective, your perspective on that.
No, well, I'm a Canadian first and foremost. That's the decision I made. I didn't come 6,000 miles away not to value what Western civilization is, what Rousseau or Voltaire or what the American or the French revolutions contributed. But let me go back to one issue that the mayor seems to have missed. Just last week, in his city, neo-Nazis smashed up the face and family of an anti-racist activist. So to suggest that there is no problem of racism in the city, well, then that's the whole point. We do have a history of people who we should have no respect for. I have no respect for neo-Nazis, I have no respect for Nazis, and I have no respect for Muslim Brotherhood folks who are homophobic, misogynist, and who I detest. I should have the ability and the clarity to speak the truth when I wish to, and not try to hide away by glossing over the differences that exist in this country.
Let me ask
you have Africans living in Halifax that have been divided for the last 150 years. It's called Africaville. We have a legacy of racism, and we have successfully fought it. But to gloss over it as if it didn't exist is a very naive approach.
Well, let me ask Mr. Mayor, how in this position, and you now have that power, and the eyes are turned on you, that irrespective of whether or not it came up in the campaign, now people do see you as the first Muslim mayor. You're a leading figure and obviously a role model to many. How do you intend to use that position to foster that kind of multiculturalism which you feel, or the integration that you feel already exists?
Well, this is a really important question, because all of us who belong to minority communities, whether they're minority faith communities, minority cultural communities, or anything, in our entire lives, we have an extra responsibility. We have an extra responsibility that people who come from the mainstream may not have, which is that we represent not only the Canadian, the Calgarian aspect, but also the aspect of the community that we come from. During the election, it was sort of funny because people said, well, this guy's a little bit different, and his two rivals are, more what you would expect to be Calgarians. I've actually been in Calgary longer than those two rivals have been. But, over the course of the last week, I've participated in Christian services. I've celebrated Diwali with the Hindu community in Calgary. I've spent time with the Jewish community. This coming week I'll be spending time hosting Muslim leaders at Eid at City Hall. But here's the thing. I'm just doing precisely what the previous mayor did. I don't know what his faith background was, but he understood that he was the mayor for everyone, as I do, that I am the mayor for everyone who lives in this great city, and that we will be respectful of one another. And of course there are behaviors that cross the line. No one would argue that there are not. And that attack on the anti-racism activists, one of whom ran against me for mayor, who I know very, very well, I phoned them immediately upon hearing about the attack and condemned it in the strongest possible terms, because that's where you do cross the line. That's not tolerance, right? That's not respect or acceptance. And those are the kinds of behaviors that we need to speak out against. So to equate those behaviors with the behaviors of acceptance, I find a little bit strange.
Well, Tarek Fatah, I've got about a minute left, just really to get your perspective on at least, Canada being a little different from the United States, in that there certainly seems to be more, irrespective of some of those incidents you described, there seems to be more of a case of tolerance, acceptance, multiculturalism, that Canada seems to be on a better path in some ways. Do you see that continuing, or do you think things will get worse?
Canada has a tradition of having a left organized in this country, whereas the United States of America does not. We have the NDP over here, and the CCF prior to that, which has a long tradition of attacking any exclusion from the left. But I must share with you that cultures are not equal. The culture that suggests that a woman should be at the back of the bus or the back of the mosque is not the same as the culture that suggests that women sit in the front row. Races are equal. Ability is equal, genders can be equal, but when you suggest that all cultures are equal, it lowers the fight that has gone on for 200–300 years, that have brought people up in the front and have defaced tribalism from our cultures. So it's very dangerous to say that multiculturalism, we need to share each other's culture. Not at all.
Okay. Well, listen, gentlemen, it's always a pleasure talking with both of you. I'm sorry we've run out of time, but Mr. Mayor, congratulations on your election. Tarek Fatah, thank you very much for being with us.
Thank you very much, Rez.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for your questions too. Remember, you can follow the show on Facebook and see what we're up to there. You can give us feedback on the topics and post your questions and comments. And that's it from me and the team. We'll see you next time.